And we are live. Man, welcome back to another episode of Flow of Wisdom Radio, joined by my good friend, Dr. Wilbur Allen. He is an engineer, photographer, and so much more. Wilbur has had work featured on just about every major media outlet from Fox News, the History Channel, Discovery Channel, the Weather Channel, country music television, and so much more. He is a UFO expert and his documentation is one of one. No one in the world has the type of technology that he has, and no one has the footage or is capturing the footage that he has. And we want to bring awareness to his work that he has been doing consistently, probably almost about a decade. Dr. Wilbur Allen, welcome back to the program, man. How are you?
Thank you for having me, Sean. I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited to really pick up where we left off last week when we went live. You mentioned quite a few things, and this week I kind of want to stay focused just so we can go in depth on some of the information that you provided. Now let's catch some of our latest or newest viewers up to speed. You have images on your website, which is ufodc.com, of what's called Tic Tac UFOs, along with the USS Nimitz. Explain the significance of the United States Air Force, or not the Air Force, I'm sorry, the Navy
Navy, yes.
USS Nimitz. What's so significant about this ship?
Well, the ship itself, in a training exercise in 2004 along the Pacific Palisades and California area, documented organisms in which had launched F-18s to intercept. And the F-18s managed to come into range of whatever these organisms were. And notice I'm using the word organisms because they've defined them, a Tic Tac, as a spacecraft. But we know for a fact that, based on information documented by the International Space Station, that these objects are entering into Earth's atmosphere from outer space.
So you say organisms. Now, are we talking about life form, something that's a living organism?
Based on my data, and I've got a accumulated level of technology that was able to document these things as a plethora of material, and each and every one of them, though they have a unique similarity, and that similarity would be their overall structural definition. They're shaped like Tic Tacs, the candy, which I have right here. They're shaped just like these little things right here.
Right.
And what was interesting, though, is that, based on my information, and my information is rather extensive, that the variations, there is only one or two instances in which, when I documented these objects, that the objects that I would document would be exactly the same. So I've got 3,000 documentations of this object, with only one which was able to repeat itself along a consistent trajectory, which I believe I sent to you on a piece of information prior to this show.
You did.
But it indicates without a doubt that they are organisms. Now, what made it interesting is the variation, not necessarily just in the shape, but in the size of these objects. And initially, the objects that I'm showing were documented by the crew of Apollo 14, which was my associate, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who's passed away. He was the lunar module pilot for Apollo 14. And on the lunar surface, Dr. Mitchell documented the exact same spatial anomalies that my technology is imaging in space on a daily basis. That's what makes this rather interesting. It's not a random selection of objects. Whatever I get, these objects are constantly within a fixed region of space. When I set up my technology is set up exactly in the same manner every time I set it up. So it's aligned north, south, east, west. The telescope itself is precisely aimed 90 degrees straight up. I use X and Y axis, and everything along the axis is at zero, which means the telescope is perfectly 90 degrees straight up. And within this fixed pool of analysis, which is like a fishing hole, I get the same fish on a constant basis.
Man, that's amazing, man. So, tell me about some of these pilots that have been coming out, being vocal now that they have seen, and they switched the names. They're not no longer calling it
There, now
UFOs.
UAP. Yeah.
UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Yes.
Um, there are pilots coming out speaking out saying, "Look, we're seeing something abnormal here," and then you have mainstream media talking about it. Do you ever get leery when the mainstream media starts discussing things? Um, when you've been trying to talk about this for quite some time now.
It's interesting. My first actual Tic Tac was documented in P53 restricted airspace, which is in Washington, D.C. And the Tic Tac I documented in P53 restricted airspace was pursuing this non corporeal anomaly, meaning some kind of life form that didn't have physical form, but it manifested in terms of an energy distortion, which my cameras was able to detect. And in this documentation, this Tic Tac projected a beam of light which it tried to scoop this anomaly out of the airspace. So we know for a fact, whatever they are, they're here, and it is indeed an organism. It's, without a doubt, there is no doubt about it because of the consistency associated to the data that I was able to gather with the telescope technology that I created. So we know, just because of the facts of the variations, it's like, you know, humans are all uniquely the same. We all have heads, legs, arms, etc. We all have overall uniform definitions in terms of the way we look, but the differences would be our facial features, our fingerprints, etc. The same thing applies to these spatial anomalies. They look exactly the same, but they're totally different, all of them. What made my information even more abstract is the field that's emitted by these organisms. The field that is emitted shows without a doubt that they have this rotational modulating energy field which rotates counterclockwise around these objects. And based on the energy field, I was able to determine, based on the energy field itself, that there was one particular sample that repeated itself along a consistent trajectory in my fixed pool of analysis.
Wilbur, let's talk about your technology because we have new viewers here um, and new listeners as well. The type of lens that you have, no one else really has the type of technology that you're using. In last week's interview and conversation that we had, you referred to your lens that it can see the invisible, what humans we can't see with the naked eye, and talking about like up to 150 miles or 200 miles. Elaborate on the type of lens that you use on your telescope.
Well, I used existing technology. Obviously, I don't have the manufacturing capabilities to create something along those lines myself, but there is existing technology that you can augment. And I augmented a standard Celestron telescope, which is not really the standard, but the Celestron Edge HD 11, and made it a variable, which the telescope itself is a 5,000 millimeter telescope. And I turned it into a 933.3 millimeter f2.0 lens by inverting it. And an inverted lens meaning on most telescopes there are two mirrors. There's a primary mirror, which is at the front of the telescope, and a secondary mirror, which is at the back of the telescope. The telescope's secondary mirror generally is the circumference of the telescope itself. So I use the secondary mirror as the primary mirror. So I'm looking backwards into the telescope, and the larger mirror is able to gather more light at a f2.0 instead of f10, which the telescope was designed specifically for deep space applications at f10. But in most cases, if a person is into photography, they understand that a lens that doesn't have the capability of gathering light does not function completely correctly at f10. So at f2.0, at 900 millimeters, I created this large eye which can see in absolute darkness. But what I was able to do was convert that eye into a variable infrared lens and replace in an area which is called a hyperstar chamber, and replace the hyperstar chamber with an infrared filter. And in that chamber is where I was able to modify the lens itself to view into invisibility.
Wilbur, when did you make that significant change to the lens that you have now? And what was the first thing that you noticed that you were able to witness that you were not able to witness with the previous technology you were using?
The lens. Well, what's interesting is that whatever these objects are, they appear, in some cases, in the visible light spectrum. But with this lens, which was created in 2017, I started to notice, and it was interesting. This was well before the media started to promote and discuss the USS Nimitz tic tac anomalies. I started noticing tic tacs in our atmosphere, thousands of them.
Mm.
And they're not stars. So you think looking at some of this material that we're looking at a star, that ain't no star, brother.
Now,
That's something stationary.
now, how would you know that they're not stars? I mean, is it shaped differently? Were
No,
you
what was interesting is that these stars, though in some cases they would appear in the lens itself as a stationary object, once I started recording, I started noticing they started moving. And a star just doesn't move because Earth is rotating around, in space, and everything that's in space is in a stationary position. But these objects, they're not in space, they're inside our atmosphere. And once they're inside the atmosphere, they
hold
can
on,
give
hold
you
on.
this illusion.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I want explain that they're not in space, but they're in our atmosphere. Break that down for me, please.
Well, I don't know if I sent you the sample. I do believe I did, but on a
I'm,
sample that was taken by the International Space Station, they documented these dots, which there was based on this image sample itself, 500 to 600 of these dots flying towards Earth, headed towards Earth's atmosphere, and they documented the objects as they entered the atmosphere. They would vanish, and whatever these objects are, as they enter the atmosphere, apparently they cloak themselves. But once they're in there and you look at them and they stay in a stationary position, essentially, from what I understand, they're monitoring us,
are you able to see it now?
of
As
course.
I'm sharing the screen right now. Are you able
I'm
to?
not sure. I'm not sure. I don't see what you're sharing, but I'll just continue with the discussion. But whatever these
Okay.
objects are, if you look at them, and I use star charts, and in the star charts are fixed stars, which are known to people who do astrophysics and astronomy. But in my samples, there are additional dots which are not necessarily registered in star charts. Those additional dots that aren't registered in the star charts are these objects in a geosynchronous orbit with Earth.
That's amazing. I'm looking at the images that you sent. I wish I could have been able to share prior to this broadcast so that everyone else can see. But it looks like a cluster of I don't know. I want to say stars, but it looks like a whole bunch of tiny dots, like you were saying. Um, and you said your data suggests that these are organisms with nuclear impulse systems. Nuclear impulse systems. That's an interesting theory,
Theory,
Dr.
Dr.
Wilbur.
Wilbur.
There we
There we
go.
go.
There we go. We know we're electrical impulse organisms. Our brain sends an electrical impulse to the body, which makes us move, function, speak, whatever. Whatever these things are, they're nuclear impulse because of their ability to vanish and disappear and reappear. That ability only comes with something that has immense energy, and that immense energy would have to be nuclear or along those lines. Because without that, there's no way we could technically fold space with basic energy. It has to be high energy to fold space. It's theoretical physics we're talking about. Einstein postulated that. So, without a doubt, whatever these objects, organisms are, they exist at a much higher level than what we would consider as a standard electrical impulse organism. And in my opinion, they're nuclear impulse. You're muted.
When
When
I
I
hear
hear
nuclear,
nuclear,
I
I
think
think
of
of
danger.
danger.
Are
Are
we
we
hearing the
hearing the
same
same
thing
thing
as
as
far
far
as,
as
when you say
when you say
nuclear
nuclear
impulse, is
impulse?
this
Is this
some
some
sort
sort
of
of
warning or
warning or
thing that
thing
we
that we
should be
should be
aware
aware
of?
of?
Let's just say this: anything with that amount of energy, we should not engage. And the Navy, which is basically following my work, and I've got to mention Admiral Michael Gilday. He's the head of U.S. Navy operations. They do understand that whatever these are, they are superior to anything that the Navy has in terms of aircraft, in terms of vehicles, like the Nimitz itself is a nuclear aircraft carrier. And
Mm-hmm.
they exist along the same lines. It's interesting that in most cases, on most U.S. Navy ships, which are nuclear powered, that these objects follow them.
That's interesting. You know what with the climate of the world that's going on. I think we got a G20 that's coming up. I'm getting a little feedback. Let me turn this down here. With the climate that's going on right now with the world, Russia, these world leaders ready to meet. China has agreed to meet. I think it was an interview that I watched recently. They were interviewing the Prime Minister of Taiwan. What's your make of the current climate on the geopolitical spectrum?
I think we all should tread water lightly and not step on stones, because, each power that you've mentioned has nuclear capability. Each country has the ability to obliterate any other place on Earth. So it's something that we've got to be conscious of, because that was one of the things that was an issue when we initially bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with that amount of power that was used during those days in World War II. That we should be cautious, because you see the outcome of those countries. It was rather devastating. A nuclear weapon is something you don't want to play with.
Dr. Wilbur, can you blow up the picture of the images that you have that you've documented recently?
I can show the videos, which, let's see if I can get this to work.
Okay.
Again, this is a Tic Tac. Hopefully it'll play without going to a commercial.
See if we can make your screen bigger.
Notice the energy field around it.
That's amazing.
We don't want to mess with anything like that. Now imagine, let me see if I can mute this. Now imagine, you can see obviously that this object has nuclear energy about it. Do you think you want to engage it? I don't think so. It is superior to anything we have. Plus, we've got forward flight technology. This thing can not only move forwards, it can fly backwards, up, down. It has variable flight capabilities. It's almost like a helicopter, but substantially more advanced. And it can appear and disappear at will.
And due to your lens, you can't see what we are looking at. You can't see this with the naked eye, right?
You cannot see that with the naked eye. And we're looking in gamma X-ray bands of invisibility and infrared.
So what we're looking at is like a loop of different different variations zoomed in
The
and
variation,
zoomed out.
because it's a full color infrared, it shows differences. When you start playing in colors, each color shows something specifically different. And what was interesting is I noticed in the variations in gradients that the field of this object looked totally different. And you could see, like, for example, this field is green, but its outer perimeters are blue. You could see that. So whatever this field is, it affects the airspace around it.
What was your initial, by the way, for those that are listening, you can see what we're looking at on his website at ufodc.com. He also has a YouTube channel. Is it Dr. Wilbur Allen?
It is Dr. Wilbur Allen.
Check out these images and you can see what we are talking about. Now, let me ask you, when you first captured this and you took it off your SD card and looked at it, pull it up on your computer, what was your initial reaction when you seen this movement from your footage?
Well, what was strange, it's not just this object, but specifically the other objects that were along the same trajectory that all had the same physical characteristics. And I was taken away by that, because normally speaking, what we don't have in most cases when a person starts documenting unidentified spatial anomalies is uniform consistency. And it showed without a doubt that these objects have uniform consistencies associated to them. I mean, I could show other files that, in fact, I should do that. Stand by.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, your hypothesis, where do you think these objects are going? Are they coming from? You know, and also, are you seeing the same trajectory? Are they going? Are these different
Let's look at
locations?
let's look at this file right here.
Holy snap! What's that? Four of them,
There's four of them, four different regions. It's four different files, and notice
and they're
they're
moving
along
in
the
sync.
same. They're moving at the exact same velocity in each case, and they're taken days apart.
Do you think it's one large mass, and you're only seeing four lights of one large entity?
No, no, no. Listen to me. This is four different files. These are taken in 4 days, 4 different days.
Okay,
And I made a a quad screen
got
in
you.
Autodesk 3D Max, and I put the files into Autodesk 3D Max to show the uniform definitions associated with these objects.
Is
And
your
look, it's the same object.
are you at the same location, the same exact location shooting,
When
filming it?
I set my telescopes up, it's a fixed pool of analysis. The fixed pool of analysis aligned magnetically north, south, east, and west. And along the X and Y axis is at zero. So that means I'm perfectly aligned 90 degrees straight up. And this is what I see directly over my head.
Do you get any naysayers with your work and images that you
You
capture?
get them all the time. You can see the naysayers and the comments that are made by on the material from the USS Nimitz. There's people that's not going to believe it because in their minds, you know, they've been indoctrinated by maybe Star Wars or whatever the case may be, that these objects will have a certain look like a spacecraft, but these are not the same thing as what you would see in the movies.
Man, speaking of the movies, man, what has anybody from Hollywood reached out to you to utilize your technology or your expertise or anything?
Not one soul, and I was disappointed, I've got to mention my disappointment in a film called Nope because it was incoherent in my opinion, was nothing like what I'm able to document with my technology. So in my opinion, they did not do the research that was necessary to create that film.
You know, you brought that up the last time, and I've yet to watch it. You're talking about the Jordan Peele new film called Nope, and you disagree with it. Don't tell me, don't give me any spoilers because I want to
I'm not going to
I
give you the
want to watch
gist
it.
of
But
it, but I'll just say that when you finish watching that film, you'll be disappointed.
really, maybe it was just because it was uh, pure entertainment. Were you looking at some sort of factual information to come out of Hollywood?
Generally, when they make these films, they use some element of fact. You know, Star Trek was built on elements of fact. And in this particular case, it is impossibility from what he was presenting on film that any of which he showed is a possible reality. Not at all.
Man, so what do you did he deal with any paranormal in the film?
Um, there's sequences there which I'm still trying to figure out what any of that had to do with the film itself because you don't want me to give you the spoilers. But
Okay,
there were
okay.
elements there that this doesn't make any sense. It was just that they threw that in. You know, I mean, it just was very strange.
What film have you seen in the last maybe 5 years, 2 to 5 years that you can tell like, look, this is some authenticity. It's based on some real information here. What's a film that you
I
can
wouldn't
think
say
of?
2 to 5 years, but Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that's
Okay.
based on some level of authenticity. Television shows like Star Trek, definitely based on authenticity because the anomalies that were presented in terms of sci-fi in the TV show Star Trek were indeed documented by my camera systems, especially the non-corporeal organisms.
Mm. Have you had any kind of have you sent your work out to the Navy or the any of the military branches? President Trump set up this space force when he was in office, and they now have a space force task force or
Uh,
what have you, a UAP task force.
I sent my materials to the Pentagon, and they came back with absolutely ridiculous statements. They were telling me to get closer, and this was before I created the Hyperstar lens. So after I created the Hyperstar lens, I showed them the even closer definition samples that I was able to generate in infrared, and they basically told me I need to get on board the object and take pictures from the bridge. Like
Now, let me ask you,
that's kind of weird.
for 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 those that aren't familiar with Dr. Wilbur Allen, um, you've worked under two presidents. You worked as an engineer on Air Force One under President Reagan and also President
H.W. Bush,
Bush. Okay,
senior Big Daddy Bush,
Daddy Bush.
head of the Central Intelligence Agency.
And can you use that your credentials as leverage? I mean, your resume pretty much speaks for itself, but
Listen to
doesn't
me.
that
My
add you?
resume knocks me out of the ballpark. People ignore me altogether because they think, first of all, that I'm lying. Secondly, even with photographic documentation and the documents associated to the White House, they don't believe it.
Hmm,
I mean, I've got signed presidential flight certificates for Air Force One. I got a picture of myself with H.W. Bush. Nobody believes it.
that's crazy, man. What is your hopes to out of this recent documentation that you're capturing on a weekly, if not daily basis? What is your hopes, man? What is the end game for you?
Well, for the moment, I had to shut down my technology because there's so much data. Adding icing to the cake doesn't make the cake any better, and I'm adding more icing, more icing, more icing. And for me, I had to stop and take the data that I do have and put it together in such a manner that it presents itself. And I presented it as a collective presentation. And the collective presentation was defined in a manner in which the objects that I would document were each put in a group. And you show the uniform consistencies of each object within each group. And it shows without a doubt that whatever I'm getting is here. And they're showing up not necessarily in a manner in which people can see. But what makes this even more interesting is that they've been seen during the days of Jesus. They were also documented during the 1561 Nuremberg celestial event in Nuremberg, Germany. So we know without a doubt, whatever these objects are, they have not changed in almost 1,000, 2,000 years, and that indeed we're seeing technically the same objects. So
Wow.
I'm going to shut this down and go with another
Okay.
specific file. But it shows, the variations, especially here. I was getting tubular shaped tic tacs, and the tubular shaped tic tacs are even more abstract because these things look like cigars. Let's see if we can get her to come up.
Cigars. Now you're speaking my language.
See that? Look at that.
Yeah.
And we're
Like
looking at two
a
different
spear.
objects along 2 different days in a dual comparative analysis, and they both move at the exact same velocity, and they're technically along the same trajectory, constantly.
And the Pentagon had no explanation for that, other
Pentagon
than
says
get closer.
absolutely. They have absolutely nothing to say because technically speaking, I've done what they have not done before. I've done what NASA has not been able to do. And that show without a doubt that whatever these objects are, they're in our atmosphere. What's even more interesting is the data from Apollo 14. Dr. Edgar Mitchell was dismissed by NASA, and Dr. Mitchell's material showed on the lunar surface these objects, but they dismissed them.
You've appeared on Fox News before. Have you tried to submit any of this to any of the media outlets?
It's a little game because you become a matter of popularity in a sense when you start dealing with the media. And I'm not going to sit here and try to force these people to look at my materials like taking the horses to water, making them drink. They would prefer to use something like, and I noticed this considerably, that they'll take someone's cell phone footage and put that footage up against mine and use the cell phone footage, even though my footage is technically superior.
Do you think it's because the cell phone footage is capturing, an enormously wide shot, of some of Earth and not just a
Well,
zoomed in
no.
close up?
Think about this. A cell phone only has a 3 millimeter lens,
Mhm.
and a 3 millimeter lens can only cover but so much, while a 933.3 millimeter lens covers a specifically more defined region of space.
That's a flex there. Not a 3 millimeter lens, but a 933.3. That's a big flex, man. Wilbur,
Absolutely.
you've been pretty consistent, man. Quite some time. My hope is that there'll be some sort of breakthrough for you to get your documentation out there on a wider audience, a wider audience. If you were, giving you the platform, man, what would you like to say to those out there that may be skeptical and haven't seen your footage or anything, and they're just hearing about, your website, ufodc.com? What kind of message would you like to get out there right now?
I would like them to be more aware of what's happening around them. But then again, keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, that the technology it creates can see in invisibility. So most of that which I present is invisible to humans. We have a very limited range of visibility. A human during the day, for example, if you're familiar with photography, during the day, the human eye is ISO 0 because it has to be dilated for it to be able to look into daylight with the amount of sunlight that's presented during sunlight daylight hours. At night, the ISO is limited to 800 ISO. And if you know anything about photography, 800 ISO is very limited in terms of its ability to gather levels of low light. While the technology that I created is looking into space at 400,000 ISO, which is 400,000 times greater than that of man. So if we have developed the ability to see things in extreme invisibility, it would be under these controlled conditions in which I created. Humans can't possibly see that. Impossible.
Well, Dr. Wilbur Allen, his website is ufodc.com. Man, it's always a pleasure, man, talking to you. And, we've been doing this a little bit more frequently now. I like to keep that up, man. Any kind of new data that you come across, man, let's get you back on the
Well,
program.
we're only scratching the surface here. This is like the tip of the iceberg. I've got other objects. The streaks of light, especially, are extremely bizarre. But it's what we call the shooting star, and you see these shooting stars in most cartoons and in some commercials. You see them shoot by, and they call them meteors. But when is a meteor uniform and consistent in terms of its length? And even more, when is the meteor 1,000 miles long?
Well, we'll tease that for the next broadcast. Let's be sure to touch on the shooting stars, because it might have been a week or two ago that they were telling folks that they were going to see a meteor shower.
Perseids, yeah, but then they showed a sample, and there's one that's curved, that's flying in an arc. Meteors don't fly in an arc; they fly in straight lines.
So, what do you think that was?
Spacecraft.
But how are they able to predict this so-called meteor shower then?
They know they're coming, but it's what they say that's really interesting. It's like, and I noticed I'll get comments on my website, and one person said, "Oh, and in my opinion, this is a meteor." But nobody asked his opinion. The person doesn't have a PhD. The person doesn't have the ability to do spatial research, and the spatial research that I was able to gather indicates without a doubt that these are not meteors. Meteors don't have energy trails behind them like propulsion systems or force fields around them.
You said something that just kind of made my hair stand up a little bit. You said they're coming. What can you elaborate on that? What's coming, man? What do you know that we don't know?
That's it's already news that they've documented in spacecraft, massive spacecraft, for example, some spacecraft as big as planets headed towards Earth.
Jesus, is this the Wormwood or the Red Planet that they've referenced over the years?
Well, that there's supposedly an alternate Earth, and there's the very strong possibility that this alternate Earth, which is rotating in the same manner in which we are around the sun, but parallel to where we are,
right,
is possibly the origins and locations of which people like Jesus came from. Superior technology.
Let's leave it off at let's stop right there and pick back up on that on the next broadcast. The shooting stars, the anticipation to what's coming. Let's focus on that on the next broadcast, man. How's that sound?
That sounds like a winner.
Wilbur Allen, my guest, Dr. Wilbur Allen. Put some respect on his name. His website is ufodc.com. You could check out these images that we discussed as well on his YouTube channel, Dr. Wilbur Allen. As always, it's always a pleasure having you on Flow of Wisdom, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me, brother.
Yes, sir.